Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name is Dr. Mark Hallberg. I was part of a 4-person team stationed at Concordia Research Station, Antarctica. That place is about as isolated as any human outpost on the planet, over 3,000 kilometers from the nearest continent, 1,200 from the coast. A joint French-Italian station built for long-term human endurance studies, atmospheric research, and astronomy. The coldest inhabited place on Earth. Temperatures could drop to -80 Celsius in winter. We arrived in February. Me, Simone Levine, our atmospheric physicist, Carlos Reyes, engineer and systems tech, and Dr. Louise Everett, our expedition physician. The rotation was scheduled for 14 months, 1 Antarctic winter, 1 long period of total darkness. After the final supply flight left and the last ski-equipped Twin Otter disappeared into the pale horizon, we were alone. Concordia isn't like McMurdo or the coastal stations. No resupply during winter. No flights in or out. We had diesel tanks for power, indoor hydroponics for greens, enough dry stores to outlast a siege, and satellite comms to talk to the world, when they worked. We monitored weather balloons, atmospheric particulates, cosmic radiation. We ran psychology experiments. For a while, it felt like any other overwintering rotation. Quiet, predictable, cold. I don't remember the exact day we lost full comms. There wasn't one sudden blackout, just a series of drops, lag, packet loss, delayed messages, then nothing but static. We assumed a solar event, maybe a CME. It happened before. High-altitude interference could fry uplinks, but something felt off. Simone tried bouncing signals through the Argentinian relay. Louise emailed her husband every day but didn't hear back after mid-June. Even the ESA servers stopped updating. Carlos spent nights rebooting the satellite dishes and signal processors. Nothing changed. By August, the long night had us all wound tight. The blackout weighed heavier than the cold. We made guesses. Global internet outage, cyber attack, political conflict, maybe war. There was no alarm, no final message, just absence. I remember eating in silence, the same bowl of lentil soup, steam fogging the window as outside winds howled across the ice field. We still had our local systems, weather sensors, internal emails, radio logs, nothing beyond the ice plateau. Louise tried to keep morale up. Routine checkups, structured meals, simulated sunlight. It worked for a while. Simone read old detective novels. Carlos built a drone from spare parts. I kept recording climate readings, even if no one was receiving them. We thought the outside world would fix itself, that someone was watching, waiting, that people in Houston or Paris or Rome would break the silence with instructions. They never did. In early September, just before the sun returned, Carlos spotted something on the horizon. Movement. Something dark across the white, barely visible through the long lens. At first, we thought it was mirage, heat distortion. But it was real. Slow, unnatural. A dark figure trudging through snowbanks 2 kilometers out. We debated it for hours. Who could survive out there without transport? No one arrives in winter. No land access. No aircraft. We checked the emergency frequencies. Still nothing. Simone suggested it might be one of the Chinese researchers from Kunlun Station gone rogue. But that was over 1,000 kilometers away, across impassable terrain in winter. The next day, the figure was closer. We watched it through the upper window in the observatory. It moved in erratic bursts, slow and meandering, then still, like it was looking for something, or blindly moving forward without knowing why. Carlos wanted to lock the doors. Simone thought it might need help. I just stared, trying to rationalize. No one could be out there alone. That night, we lost one of the outer cameras. Snow blindness, we thought. Wind knocked it off axis. But when Carlos checked the footage before the feed died, we saw it. Closer now. Dragging one leg, tattered coat flapping like shredded nylon, face obscured under a hood, and something else. Behind it, in the frame's far corner, another shape, then another. A line of them. Simone vomited in the hallway. Louise said nothing for a long time, just stared at the frame. By morning there were at least a dozen, figures shambling across the ice field. No gear, no packs, no sleds, no protection from the cold. Yet they kept coming. Some with skin blackened by frost, one with a jaw dislocated, swaying open like a broken hinge, another missing half its scalp, still walking. Carlos barricaded the lower access tunnel. Simone stopped sleeping. We scanned the radio for anything. Emergency channels, military signals, commercial broadcasts. Silence. Just static and the low hiss of dead air. Louise finally said what none of us wanted to. They're not alive, not in the normal sense. She ran simulations on hypothermia thresholds, exposure time, skin rupture, cellular breakdown in sub-zero environments. Nothing should be walking after 90 minutes in that cold, she whispered. I pulled up archived footage from global news sources stored locally, just scraps. Headlines from May and June. Strange infection hits Jakarta. Quarantine declared in southern France. Unrest in Mexico City after hospital burnings. Then it stopped. The logs ended June 12th, like the world went dark after that. Outside the figures drew closer, not all at once, slow and staggered. Some wandered sideways. Some knelt for hours, then stood again. One approached the weather mast and collapsed against it. We didn't go out to recover the sensor. We argued. Carlos wanted to stay sealed inside and wait it out. Simone thought we should retreat to the supply outpost 30 kilometers west. Louise ran inventory reports. We had fuel for 6 more weeks, food for 10 months. But our water recycler was starting to fail, and the generator belts were down to 1 spare. We'd planned for isolation, not siege. Then, 3 nights later, one reached the outer wall. We heard the scrape, metal on plastic, then a muffled thud, a dragging noise, then silence. Carlos checked the exterior cam. Its head leaned against the siding, forehead pressed to the corrugated shell. No frost breath, no blinking, just staring. Hours passed. Then the scratching began. It wasn't frantic, just persistent, like it didn't know what it was doing but wouldn't stop. Knuckles raking against composite alloy, nails breaking, skin tearing, but no reaction, no blood, just scratching. We shut off the lights, covered the windows. We sat in the core room, 4 grown adults, afraid to speak above a whisper. Louise checked our oxygen levels. I watched the power gauge. Carlos cleaned the backup heater's intake filter 4 times that night. No one asked why. More came the next day. 7 of them stood at different points outside the dome. 2 sat in the snow. 1 pressed its face to the southern airlock. And the scratching continued. Long, dry sounds like twigs on aluminum. Simone finally said it. They're dead. Carlos snapped, shouted, demanded she take it back. But we all knew. We didn't call them zombies. That word felt childish, absurd. We didn't have a word, just them. I stopped writing my daily logs. What was the point? The instruments still collected data, but the data didn't matter. Wind speeds, atmospheric ozone. None of it meant anything anymore. I let the atmospheric probes run their cycles, untended. The balloon launches halted. Simone stopped running weather models. She stopped speaking altogether after that. She would sit in the corner of the mess hall, wrapped in a fleece blanket, eyes locked on the snow outside as if the ice itself might move. None of us wanted to keep watching the cameras, but we couldn't look away either. Carlos set up a constant feed on a side monitor in the comms room, muted, always on. They were still out there, 15 by now, standing, wandering, sometimes walking into each other, then slowly separating again like they had no purpose but to exist. Louise tried to stabilize our mental state with routine. She ordered us to eat 3 times a day. She created a rotating shift for maintenance checks, but the silence broke the rhythm. There's a difference between solitude and isolation. Antarctica teaches you that early, but this wasn't just solitude. This was abandonment. It felt like we were forgotten by the Earth itself. On one of the last evenings we ate together, Carlos asked, "What if they're drawn to heat?" No one answered. We had suspected it. We stopped going near the outer walls. I'd begun sleeping in the observatory above the lab module, where the glass was thick enough to muffle the scratching. Sometimes I could see them from up there, moving slowly through the perimeter haze, their bodies just silhouettes against the floodlight-reflected snow. We'd rationed fuel without saying the word emergency, but that's what it was. The main generator showed signs of intake irregularity, condensation buildup from inconsistent internal heating. The fuel filter was frosting more often. Carlos did everything he could, but we only had so many parts. The secondary generator, meant for science modules, wasn't designed for sustained base-wide power. Our options were shrinking every day. There was a French supply depot known as Dome Charlie, about 31 kilometers northeast. It was stocked with emergency rations, fuel, even a radio backup kit. We'd trained for that trek in drills, 2-day journey on foot with loaded sleds in stable conditions. But that was before. Louise brought it up first, a potential supply run. Not all of us, just 2. She wanted me and Carlos, said Simone wasn't stable enough, and she'd stay behind to monitor systems. I didn't like the idea of splitting up. Neither did Carlos. But Louise insisted we couldn't wait until the generator failed entirely. We needed that backup radio kit. We needed fuel. We needed something to do before our minds imploded inside this tin can coffin. We left the next morning. 0600 hours. Pre-dawn, though in September the light was just returning. Twilight stretched long and shallow across the horizon. The kind of half-light that makes everything look unreal, like you're walking through the reflection of a dream. We took 1 sled each, packed with survival gear, heat packs, food, and a collapsible tent. Carlos carried the beacon scanner. I had the backup flare gun and a sidearm, an old Italian-made Beretta Louise had kept from a previous ESA mission, mostly ceremonial, but it fired. The station door opened into stillness. No wind. No movement from the figures still lingering around the dome. They didn't react. We slipped around the backside, dragging sleds into the hard ice channel and moving northeast, keeping the sun's edge to our left. The silence was so complete I could hear the crunch of snow inside my own ears. Every step forward felt like we were crawling further out of reality. We didn't speak much the first few hours, just pushed forward, following GPS markers buried under the snowpack. Dome Charlie wasn't on any public map, but we had the coordinates, ESA protocol, cold backup for stations like ours. I remember thinking, if the world was truly gone, then what else had ESA hidden? Who else was still out here clinging to ghosts? By noon we stopped to rest. Carlos checked the scanner. No signals, not even telemetry from Concordia. Either the base was shut down or Louise hadn't activated the relay. I didn't ask. We both ate a protein bar, sipped heated tea from thermoses. The cold seeps through everything, no matter how much insulation you wear. Your bones feel hollow after a while, not from frost, but from emptiness. We pressed on another 6 hours before setting camp. A low-lying ridge gave us cover from wind. We raised the tent with practiced silence, each knowing where our hands needed to be. Inside, the heat pack activated, and the thin layer of warmth it provided felt obscene. Carlos asked if I thought the infection could survive this far south. I told him it didn't matter. If they were walking out there in that temperature, they weren't bound by the rules we knew. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes, curled under the foil blanket. The next morning, the wind picked up. Low gusts from the west, enough to slow us, but not whiteout conditions. I took point. Carlos followed with the beacon scanner in his chest pouch. The sky was overcast, a dull, unbroken grey. Around 1400 hours, we crested a basin that led into the supply depot's region. I saw something then, the dome. Not the big kind like Concordia, more like a buried silo. Only the upper hatch protruded, half covered in drifted snow. Solar panels poked out of the surrounding ice, shattered. A wind turbine lay on its side, blades sheared. Carlos cursed. Looks like it took a hit. I didn't ask from what. We approached slowly. No sign of movement. The entry panel was frozen over, but the keypad still had power. I punched in the emergency override. The door groaned and unsealed. The smell inside was wrong. Not rot, just stillness. The kind of dead air that no machine has cycled in weeks. We found 3 bodies in the lower compartment, 2 wearing ESA patches, the third in Chinese polo gear. No obvious wounds, just still. Faces slack, mouths open, skin frostbitten. Their boots were off, gloves too. One had a smashed comm tablet in his lap. Carlos reached for it. I told him not to. He took it anyway. Inside the central module, we found crates of dry rations, sealed drums of diesel, and 1 backup antenna rig with analog receivers. Carlos opened the lid, exhaled sharp relief. It's intact. We packed the sleds with what we could carry. 2 drums of fuel, the antenna, compressed food. No one spoke about the bodies again, not that day. On the second night, we camped closer to the ridgeline. We ate quickly and zipped the tent, keeping our breaths shallow and quiet. At around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a noise. Not wind. Something scraping the nylon. A soft, dragging sound. I sat up. Carlos was already looking at me. Neither of us moved for a long minute. Then I reached slowly for the flare gun. We stayed like that until first light. When we emerged, nothing was there. No tracks, no prints. Just our tent, the sleds, and the empty white. We made the return journey in silence. It took us 14 hours to reach the outer marker post for Concordia. The station came into view at a distance, low and quiet. No plume from the generator exhaust. No exterior lights. I felt an ache then, not of pain, but of wrongness. Carlos muttered, "Something's off." We approached carefully, left the sleds at the first windbreak. I entered the admin module through the backup hatch. It was dark. Not blackout dark, just powered down. The auxiliary batteries were keeping emergency LEDs running. The main systems were offline. I called out. No answer. Carlos followed me into the comms room, still warm, not freezing, which meant the heat wasn't out for long. Then we heard it, a soft hum, low and repetitive, a fan spinning somewhere above us. We moved toward the med bay. Louise was there, sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were open, not focused, just open. A shallow line of blood, old and dry, ran from her temple. Her lips were blue. She didn't react to our entrance, just rocked slightly. "They came through the snow," she said softly. "It wasn't sealed. I thought I locked it." Carlos rushed past her, calling for Simone. He found her in the observatory. She had climbed to the very top, where the telescope feeds were stored, slumped over, motionless. The window beside her was shattered inward. A blood smear arced along the glass frame. No body inside the room except hers. The camera feed Carlos had set on loop was still running, though static covered the display. He turned it off. I stood next to Louise for a long time before speaking again. "What happened?" She didn't answer at first, just stared. Then she whispered, "One of them got in. I heard the door alarm, but I was late. I tried to lock it behind him, but Simone..." She went out. She said she couldn't hear them anymore. I think she was trying to prove they were gone. I looked at her for a while, trying to read beyond the shock. Her pupils were slightly dilated. She was wrapped in 2 layers of thermal gear, despite the heating still working in this module. Her lips were dry and cracked. The way she rocked wasn't conscious. Carlos came back in after checking the perimeter. He looked at me and shook his head. No more signs of intruders. No tracks, no movement. Nothing but the wind curling along the snow ridges and the hum of the base running on emergency reserves. We gave Louise water and wrapped her in a thermal blanket. She resisted at first, but I kept speaking gently until she finally took a few sips. Carlos prepped a small dose of diazepam from the med kit, just enough to let her sleep. She'd been awake too long. After she drifted off, we sat in the kitchen module, the overhead LEDs flickering from low power. We didn't say much, not at first. The rations sat untouched on the counter. "She wasn't lying," Carlos finally said. "There's damage to the east airlock panel. Looks like something forced it. It didn't close properly." "Did she fix it?" "I sealed it. Welded a brace over the inner latch. If anything's still out there, they're not coming through that door." "Did Simone go out through there?" "Maybe. There's blood around the inner chamber. No body." We fell into silence again. That night, I lay in the small bunk room where we'd once rotated shifts on research nights. It had been mine during the first few months. The mattress was cold, the blankets stiffer than I remembered. I turned off the light and listened, not for sounds inside, but outside. The scratching, the strange, absent rhythm of movement through snow. But there was nothing, just the wind, and even that was soft. In the morning I checked the generator, still holding. Fuel drums from Dome Charlie had been topped off into the reserves. We'd have another few weeks now if we were careful. Carlos tried to realign the satellite dish, hoping to find some new signal after the storm that passed during our trek. He spent 3 hours adjusting the orientation, recalculating angles, toggling frequencies. Nothing but static, broken pulses, and one short burst of distorted digital tone from a Chinese relay satellite. No identifiable message. That was the only transmission we'd received in over a month. Louise remained silent most of the day. She moved slowly, mechanically, responding to questions with nods or one-word answers. She stayed in the medical module, reviewing records on her tablet, flipping through old crew files. Once I caught her staring at Simone's handwriting in the logbooks, tracing her finger over the ink like she could bring it back. I didn't disturb her. We cleared Simone's personal effects from the observatory. Her cot was neatly made, her notebook stacked beside the thermal camera case. A cracked pair of glasses sat atop the pile. Carlos moved them carefully into a plastic bin and sealed it. I climbed up to inspect the broken window. It looked like it had been smashed inward, not from wind, but from something with weight behind it. A single set of blood tracks led to the edge. None left the room. Either Simone had left another way, or she'd gone out quietly, at her own pace before the cold took her. The days blurred together after that. We ran what systems we could. There was no longer a schedule, only necessities. Water recycling, temperature regulation, power cycling. We kept lights off in modules we weren't using, ate sparingly. Carlos repaired what he could, sealing gaps in insulation, patching cracks in the outer dome, even reinforcing the antenna mast with salvaged struts from the snow sleds. But each action felt more like ritual than survival, like we were preserving something already dead. Then on the 8th day after our return, Louise spoke clearly for the first time. "There's movement near the old station perimeter," she said over breakfast, her voice low but steady. "I saw it from the kitchen hatch. 2 figures." Carlos went straight for the cameras. The exterior feed still showed static. He pulled up the wide-angle lens manually and toggled the physical display. The image sharpened through interference. And there they were, barely visible. 100 meters out, just past the waste burn zone. 2 shapes. Human. Moving slow. One staggered with a limp. The other swayed in a strange, lopsided rhythm. Neither reacted to the camera's slow pan. We didn't argue this time. No debates about what they were or what might be misunderstood. We watched for nearly an hour. They moved forward in sudden bursts, then stood still. They didn't seem to follow a pattern, didn't look for shelter or react to the cold. Carlos locked down the main entrance manually, rechecking every inner seal. That night we heard the scratching again. Soft, measured, but from higher up this time, the observatory glass. They had climbed. Carlos and I moved in with weapons drawn. I held the flare gun. He carried Louise's Beretta. The room was empty when we arrived, but one of the large panel windows bore new cracks across its inner layer. No sign of the creature, or whatever remained of it. But the prints were there. Faint smears of something, blood or frostbitten tissue, dragged across the outer glass. We slept in shifts after that, one awake while the others tried to rest. But even when I was horizontal, I rarely slept. My thoughts churned too loudly. What else was out there? Had the infection spread across the southern continent, or had it followed the trail of human movement? Was this the edge of a dying world, or just the last place left standing? I remembered stories from years ago about the Norwegian team at Troll Station that got lost during a whiteout. All 6 found dead, scattered across the ice, some without boots or gloves, as if they'd simply walked out into the cold by choice. The mind frays easily here. The isolation corrodes logic. But this wasn't madness. This was something worse, something persistent. On the 12th day, we saw the full group again. Through the southern cam, angled at 20 degrees above the snowfield, we watched them approach in formation. Not quite a line, but not random either. 7 of them. Their movements were slow, disjointed, but unrelenting. Carlos said it was like watching a glacier move, only with a face. The lead figure had no nose. Its face was frost black, a twisted parody of flesh peeled by wind. Another dragged its leg behind it. The tendon snapped, but still somehow connected. None wore thermal gear. Their clothes were torn, outdated, one in what looked like a research station jumpsuit, the ESA patch still visible beneath layers of filth. We didn't figure out where they came from until much later. Louise was the one who found it, an archived dispatch buried in the base's old satellite inbox. The message was dated late May, just before we lost full comms. It was in French, partially corrupted, forwarded from Dumont d'Urville. Something about an unauthorized supply flight from Rothera to Kunlun Station that had gone silent over the East Antarctic Plateau. The aircraft wasn't listed on the standard ESA manifests, and it wasn't one of ours. Louise thought it might have been military or a private research charter. No transponder logs, no call signs logged past Dome C. Just one note. Final contact at 77 South 123 East. Crash likely. Hold position. Await containment clearance. If that aircraft went down anywhere near Concordia's sector, and someone aboard was infected, then we weren't just dealing with wanderers. We were on the edge of a crash site. The infected hadn't walked across the continent. They'd been brought here by accident, or worse, abandoned here and left to thaw. We sealed every entry point we could, reinforced windows with shelving units and bolted steel plates meant for lab storage. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy us time. We debated whether to try and use the long-range beacon from Dome Charlie now. Carlos had set it up in the comms room, configured to run on a separate solar battery pack. It could broadcast a looped distress signal across the remaining satellites, if any were still receiving. But we hesitated. Who would be listening? And worse, what if something else answered? That night, Louise took a sheet of station letterhead and began writing a note. I glanced at the top line. It started with her name, her title, the date. No message, just facts. She folded it once and sealed it in a plastic pouch, then slid it into the emergency locker by the main airlock. If we don't make it, she said, someone needs to know who was here. Who would find it, I asked. She shrugged. If anyone ever comes back. Carlos triggered the beacon at 0300 hours. The signal began to pulse. 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off. The message was simple. Concordia Station requesting emergency evac. Infected present. 3 survivors. Coordinates embedded. Repeats every 30 seconds. The synthetic female voice echoed faintly through the comms room each time it cycled. After a while, I stopped hearing the words and only noticed the rhythm. Like a lighthouse in the dark, warning nothing in particular. We took turns monitoring the signal while conserving energy. The solar backup could sustain the beacon and a few lights, but not the base's full power grid. With fuel reserves shrinking fast, we shut down every module that didn't directly support life or communication. No lights in the labs, no heat in the storage corridors. Only the mess, medbay, and central node stayed active. We disconnected the wireless feeds to preserve battery, sealed the unnecessary interior doors to retain heat, and layered ourselves in thermal gear at all hours. Even so, the cold crept in. The infected, whatever they were, had stopped pacing and begun to press forward. Not in a coordinated rush, not an attack. Just constant movement, inch by inch, hands dragging along the shell of the dome, their bodies bent by the wind but unbothered by it. They didn't try to dig or force entry with tools. They didn't have tools. They simply pressed, rubbed, scratched. The sound returned, dry and intermittent. Not frantic, just persistent. Carlos bolted steel plates over the observatory's lower glass. I helped him anchor them using brackets scavenged from decommissioned atmospheric sensors. We both knew it was temporary. Louise took notes daily, though I don't think she was writing for research anymore. I caught a glimpse of one page. Lists of names. Not just ours, but other station crew who had passed through over the years. People we'd trained with in Lyon. Old team leaders from previous rotations. Some I hadn't thought of in years. I think she was building a ledger of everyone who might have died, without anyone left to remember them. There was no reply to the beacon. We checked every 8 hours, still transmitting, still no signal returned. We even tried bouncing the frequency off an older ESA emergency band, in case some unmanned drone or weather balloon was listening. Nothing. By the 15th day, the cold inside the station dropped below 10 degrees Celsius. The central generator was barely able to cycle between heat and air scrubbers. Carlos diverted one of the snow melters to heat the central living space. It gave off a steady low hum that we grew used to, until one night it sputtered out. He cracked the housing and found that the intake valve had frozen over. Even inside, the ice was winning. We rationed hot liquids, 1 kettle per day. Each of us drank in silence, lingering over the warmth, like it held some promise. Louise stopped sleeping through the night. She'd sit in the kitchen module wrapped in a foil blanket, watching the small viewport. Her face looked thinner now, drawn and pale. Carlos shaved less often. His cheeks were red and chapped, his lips split. We all looked sick, but none of us had a fever. Just exhaustion, thin blood, and cold. On day 16, we lost visual contact with the exterior. It wasn't sabotage. It was weather. A whiteout storm rolled in from the west and swallowed the horizon. Visibility dropped to less than 3 meters. Wind speed exceeded 70 kilometers per hour. The cameras iced over. No light passed through the storm. Even the dome's upper vents began to whistle. We couldn't see them anymore, the infected, but we knew they were still out there. That knowledge hung in the air between us. I could feel it, as if they were breathing at the edge of our shared consciousness, dragging their hands in slow circles across the outer shell. We didn't speak much in those days. The weight of silence pressed harder than anything else. It wasn't the fear that wore us down. It was the waiting. We had no new information, no contact, no tasks. Only each other, the station's failing systems, and the things outside that never stopped existing. On the 20th day, I woke to a noise inside the station. Not outside, not the scratching, inside. A distant clang, like a metal tray dropped in one of the side modules. I sat up slowly, reaching for my lamp. Carlos was already awake, crouched near the bunkroom entrance, listening. He looked at me and raised a finger to his lips. I nodded. We checked the internal security sensors. Most were disabled to conserve power. Only the core corridor feed was active. We scanned it. Nothing. Just flickering light and empty space. Louise was still asleep, curled tightly beneath her thermal blanket. We left her undisturbed. I grabbed the Beretta. Carlos took the small aluminum fire axe we'd started keeping near the hatch. We moved slowly down the corridor, checking the locked storage modules. No doors breached, no obvious damage. The cold bit at our fingers through the gloves. When we reached the old biology lab, a room we hadn't entered in weeks, I noticed the faint trail across the floor. Not footprints, a smear, as if something had been dragged. It led toward the lab sink, then abruptly stopped. We checked every surface. No breach, no broken seal. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. The ventilation panel had come loose, swaying slightly from the ceiling. Carlos reattached it, tightened the bolts. Could have been suction from the pressure drop, he said quietly. Made something fall. We told ourselves that, but we started locking the interior module doors after that night. We lost the beacon signal on day 22. The battery failed. Maybe a circuit froze, or the signal path shorted in the cold. Either way, the broadcast stopped. Carlos tried to restart it manually. No response from the relay system. The antenna still stood outside, buried now under at least a meter of drifted snow and ice. We weren't going out there to fix it. We barely had the energy to move between modules without gloves. Louise said she heard whispering 2 nights in a row, just past the mess hall. Not voices she recognized. She didn't sound panicked, just calm, almost resolved. I listened for them the next night, stayed awake until 0400 hours. I didn't hear anything, but I knew better than to tell her she was imagining it. By day 24, we were down to less than 10 liters of fuel. The air was dry and thin. We kept breathing slowly to conserve heat. We sat near each other most hours of the day, not talking, not reading, just sitting, sharing what little warmth we could. Carlos burned a crate of old research logbooks to keep the backup heater alive. I remember watching the flame flicker across the words, pages curling into black ribbons, names and numbers disappearing forever. On day 26, Louise disappeared. We woke up to an open hatch on the south side, not breached, just opened. No alarm triggered. Her bunk was empty, her jacket missing, her boots gone. The locker stood ajar. Carlos and I searched the station twice. Every corridor, every module. We checked the observatory, the water access chamber, even the lower crawl spaces. No sign. Nothing on the cameras. The storm had cleared overnight, but the snow outside was disturbed, dragged and smoothed by wind. No footprints, just wind-scoured white. She didn't leave a note. She just walked out. We stood by the southern hatch for nearly an hour, staring into the ice field. We didn't talk about going after her, not out loud. We both knew what it meant. If she went to them, there was no bringing her back. Carlos broke the silence. She didn't want to die in here. I nodded. She wanted the choice. I nodded again. We didn't speak of her after that. The days that followed were quieter than anything I've ever known. The kind of quiet that goes beyond hearing. No more scratching, no more wind, no more motion. Just stillness. The infected stopped coming. By day 30, we hadn't seen movement outside in 3 days. The sky was clear, the snow undisturbed. It felt wrong, that calm, like something was ending, but not just for us. There was a finality to it, as if the station had passed beyond some invisible threshold. Carlos and I both felt it, though we never put it into words. Some moments you don't speak about because saying them out loud makes them too real. The infected had always been a presence on the edge of our world, something not quite here and not entirely gone, like a stain at the periphery of vision. And now even that shadow had vanished. Carlos stopped keeping track of the days after that. I kept marking them in my notebook, out of habit, though my handwriting had started to change. Sloppier, less anchored. Sometimes I'd write the same number twice, or skip one altogether. I told myself it didn't matter, but I still wrote them down. I think I needed to know that time still existed. We'd sealed most of the interior now. The lab wings were closed off, the storage module frozen over. The lower maintenance tunnel had begun to ice at the joints. Only the central spine of the station remained habitable, and even that was a stretch. The walls creaked more often. Not loudly, just small adjustments in the material, stressed by months of cold and pressure. It sounded like the building itself was groaning under the weight of memory. We ate once a day: canned lentils, rehydrated stew, vacuum-packed bread. The hydroponics had long since frozen. There were still oxygen packets if the air scrubbers failed, but those would only buy hours. We rarely spoke during meals anymore. Just passed the thermos, chewed in silence, returned to our corners. Carlos spent most of his time sitting beneath the darkened comms array, rotating the dials as if he still believed something might respond. I found myself rereading Simone's old notebooks. The handwriting was clear, clinical, careful. Her notes ended just before the blackout. The last line she wrote was about tropospheric ozone concentration. I read it over and over, not for the data but for the shape of her letters. Then, on what I believe was day 33, the radio cracked. Not much, just a brief distortion, less than a second. But it was there. Carlos froze in his chair. I dropped the notebook. We leaned in. The static returned. Then silence. Then a voice. It was faint, compressed, possibly automated. Male, mid-toned, clipped by signal loss. Rescue. Outbound vector unknown. If receiving, acknowledge. Carlos scrambled to record it, but the signal faded. He adjusted the tuner, dropped our frequency range, pulled power from the lighting system to boost the antenna. For 5 hours we sat there, watching the console, listening to the hiss. Nothing. But we had heard it. It didn't feel like hope. It felt like being watched again after days in the dark. Like something, someone had finally seen us. I asked Carlos if it could be military. He shook his head. Could have been an automated sweep, drone or satellite relay. Then he looked up. But someone's still transmitting. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the interior corridor 4 times, checking seals. I wiped the ice buildup off the inner door. I sat by the airlock and tried to imagine the world beyond the cold, what it might look like now. Was the infection global? Had any city held out? Was Concordia truly the last station? Or were there others, just as isolated, also waiting for a voice that never came? Carlos suggested we try to reach Dome Charlie again. Said maybe there was more gear we missed. A larger battery. An uplink booster. I didn't want to go. Not because of the cold. Because of what else might be out there. I told him so. He nodded. I'll go alone then. We argued. Quietly, but bitterly. I told him we weren't splitting up again. He said this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about information. If the world was still out there, we owed it to ourselves to reach it. The next morning he packed 1 sled. Just 1. Enough gear for a 2-day round trip. He left me the sidearm. Told me not to open the hatch for anyone unless I saw his face. I watched him walk into the white until his silhouette vanished behind the ridge. He didn't come back. On the second night I turned on every camera, every sensor, and stared into the storm. No sign, not even a shift in the horizon. The wind remained steady, the cold absolute. I waited 4 more days. Then I stopped waiting. The station had changed again, become a coffin with no walls. Each room was a memory, each corner a shadow. The whispering Louise once described. I started hearing it too. Sometimes in the ducts. Sometimes just under the hum of the heater. Not words, not even voices really. Just breath, familiar and not. I tried to distract myself, rewrote field reports, logged temperatures, read old books until the ink blurred. But the stillness pressed harder. When I walked through the corridor now, I spoke aloud, just to keep language from slipping away. Then the scratching returned. Soft, barely audible. At first I thought I imagined it. Then it came again, this time higher, on the observatory shell. I didn't go up there. Instead, I turned off the lights, sat in the medbay, and waited. Hours passed. More scratching. Then silence. I started writing a final report. Not for the ESA, just to organize my thoughts. My name, the date we arrived, the names of my team, what we saw, what we survived, what we couldn't. I placed it in the same plastic pouch Louise had used. slid it into the emergency locker next to hers. Then I turned off the beacon. I kept the flare gun loaded, one shell left. Not for them, for me, if it ever came to that. And then, on what I think was day 40, the voice returned, clearer this time. "McMurdo, survivors, inbound. Check coordinates." My hands shook as I scrambled to record it. The voice repeated, "Repeat, this is McMurdo emergency relay, contingent of 12, departing November base, heading east. If receiving, respond." I responded. I didn't even know if the transmission went through, but I spoke. My voice cracked. I repeated our coordinates. Then again. Silence. Then faintly. Acknowledged. Hold position. Mayday received. It was real. I waited 2 days, packed my gear, loaded supplies. I left the note behind. When the sky cleared, I stepped out of Concordia for the last time. The cold punched harder than I remembered. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the ice. I saw no one, heard nothing. But somewhere out there, someone was moving. I headed toward Dome Charlie, not to stay, just to intercept, just to see. I don't know what world waits beyond this white, but I walked into it, because someone answered, because someone was still alive, because I was tired of listening to the dead. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.